Welcome to Wisdom Journey, the podcast where we explore the path of building an online business from the ground up. Here, I share my wins, struggles, lessons, and experiments so you can learn, adapt, and grow alongside me. I also interview experts in their respective field. Whether you're just starting out or looking for new strategies to scale, this is your space to find inspiration and practical wisdom. I'm your host, Wisdom Okonkwo, and I'm excited to take you on today's journey. Today on Wisdom Journey, we're joined by Jeremy Shapiro, a serial entrepreneur, author, and business growth expert who's been helping founders scale smarter for over 2 decades. Jeremy is the creator of Your Business Growth Playbook, a framework designed to help business owners break through plateaus, systemize growth, and achieve true entrepreneurial freedom. He's been featured everywhere from NPR Money Edition to Fox News, ABC, and MarketWatch, and has helped countless solopreneurs evolve into real business owners who work on their business, not in it. When he's not advising entrepreneurs, you probably find him cycling across cities, exploring new cultures with his family. Jeremy, welcome to Wisdom Journey.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm super excited to dive deep into what it really means to grow a business that supports freedom, not just business. I want us
Business
to.
is meant to do more than just provide revenue.
Yeah, Jeremy, let's start with your story. You've been building and advising businesses since the late 90s. How did your entrepreneurial journey begin?
I've always been an entrepreneur at heart, ever since I was, under 10 years old, even dabbling in businesses. My first real business, though, was during my high school years. And when I say a real business, I mean building out a team and bringing on multiple clients and handling billing and all the things of running a business, not just, doing some work one-on-one here and there. And ever since then, all my businesses have always been in the service of fellow entrepreneurs, really helping them to get the freedom that comes from being a true business owner.
Yeah, wow. What was the first part that made you realize you didn't want to just have a job disguised as a business, a high-paying job?
Oh my goodness. So often when I'm working with business owners, I see, myself in my earlier years in business, right? Many of us, when we start in our business, it's just us, right? We maybe are doing a trade or working for a company and strike out on our own, hanging that shingle, and that's our own business. But if you peel back the layers, you look and the business owner is running around doing everything in the company, from sales to support to billing to the actual work to the marketing and everything in between. And if you ask those business owners, like some of our listeners, perhaps, what that's like, it can be challenging because that's not usually why you got into business in the first place. And certainly when you have a business that's entirely dependent upon you, it doesn't provide you any of the real benefits and perks that come with owning a business. Instead, you end up with just a glorified job. And you've got the worst parts of a job and the worst parts of owning a business.
Wow. And when you tell people, like, you're supposed to be living the life, you're an entrepreneur, and you're like, I wish I had my job back. Like, when I had my job, work ended after work. But now, I don't even know.
Yeah.
I think I have 2 full-time jobs.
Well, it's funny that that's so common, especially for our solopreneurs or our newer business owners, right? They venture out on their own. And I'll share with you a story. There's a client I was working
Please
with
do. Yeah.
who had started his own business, like many of us have, and found himself working endlessly in the business, like many new business owners do. One of the problems was he wanted to be there to answer the phone or emails when customers reached out to him, because if they needed support, it was really important he got back to them or took care of it right away, or their business might be offline for the day, and that wasn't acceptable, right? He had a lot of pride in his brand name and his business, as we all do and should. That's a good thing. The downside to that was he wasn't able to get out in nature. This is a guy who loved to mountain bike. So he liked getting out into the mountains and going in the forest and riding his bike. But you can't do that if there's no cell phone coverage. And you can't do that if you need to be on call for your clients. So when we first started talking, he was really burnt out and frustrated. The getting out in nature wasn't just good for like his physical health, it was good for his mental health. And we all know how important it is to step away from our business from time to time. That's where a lot of the ideas and the growth and the recharge can happen. And he was getting none of that. So by making a few small changes, we're able to get him time back into his day that he could use how he saw fit, right? So yes, he could get out and go back to nature, which he needed. He also could spend time in the business on the sales side, bringing on new customers or clients. He could do the visionary work that our entrepreneurs need to do and figure out product roadmap and figure out where the business wants to go and grow. He could do the marketing and all the other things we need to do in a company to grow that he wasn't able to do previously by being a solopreneur, being on call for his clients all the time.
Wow, I love that example. Yeah, we talked about you writing the book, Your Business Growth Playbook. Right before we get into the book, in a short while, I'm curious, what were the early failures or turning points that really shaped how you now help entrepreneurs scale from your own story?
You know, as I've launched each of my subsequent businesses as a serial entrepreneur now for almost 30 decades, I've found the things I like in a business, the things I don't like in a business. And these are different for all of us, right? But we figure out in any decision, right, what are the must-haves, what are the things we'd like to have, what are the things we definitely don't want, and so forth. And so over the years, as I've spun off new businesses or launched new businesses, I've kept those, top of mind. And when I haven't, those are usually the lessons we learn about what we want to do differently next time around.
Yeah.
So, I'll share with you in one of my earlier businesses, we were growing.
Yeah.
And, I've been bringing on more technicians within the business to do the work of the business. And one of the roles that I had was, I was like the account executive, as it were, interfacing with, new customers, existing customers, and so on. And so as we grew, a natural next step was to bring on other account execs to work with clients and have that relationship so we could scale beyond just me. That's a good idea in general, but from an execution standpoint, I didn't communicate that really well. We effectively just introduced a number of clients to a new name and face and also told them that they were going to be paying more money, to us,
Yeah.
to not have the relationship they had before. And we really could have handled that a lot better. And so one of sort of the learning moments from that is like scaling is good and that is expected and your clients can like that, but make sure you're communicating and having a much smoother handoff process with your customers. And especially in terms of, pricing adjustments, be mindful in terms of how you communicate the value that comes with that. And be careful in terms of how you roll it out to new customers versus existing. So a number of those lessons, we've taken away, and I talk about even in the book, in terms of how to properly adjust your pricing. Because good news for most of our business owners, you probably are long overdue to raise
Yeah.
your prices, and there are right and wrong ways to do that.
Well, how did all these failures, turning points, how did it all lead to your upcoming book, Your Business Growth Playbook? When like I just want to see what you were think. I want to hear what you were thinking at the point in time before you wrote the book. And I go, yeah, I should write a book about skill. Like, what was it? What did it feel like? Can you take us back in time?
Yeah, there's sort of this process that's happened a few times, in my business career where, I find there's an idea that I have, and it ends up being something I talk about a lot with clients and I share often. And at the point I find myself sharing the same ideas again and again, I start to write it down and formalize it a little more. So I have more of a playbook to go back to. And sometimes that turns into a workshop or a presentation or a course or something, right? But if it's clearly knowledge that many people need, and I'm saying it again and again and again, there's probably an easier way for people to access that information than hearing it from me one-on-one. And so that's happened many times over, and that was kind of the basis for this book. I found that oftentimes when business owners find me, they're feeling plateaued or stuck. Like what got them to where they are now wasn't helping them to scale beyond and continue growing. And look, we all love growth in our business. We love that feeling of a new customer coming on board, a new face coming into the business we've never seen before, seeing improved numbers month over month over month. That's a great feeling. And when that goes away or changes, that's really frustrating for us business owners. And sometimes we don't know where to go. We know what we did, but we don't know how to move forward. And so there's a number of strategies that I've used again and again with my clients and in my own businesses over the years that I started to actually codify and put down. And from that came this formula. And that really is the basis of the book. There's 3 variables in this formula. And then the book is really a recipe playbook of how to adjust each one of those 3 variables in the equation to improve them. And it's not something you just read through once and put on your bookshelf. It's a playbook, much like a cookbook, you come back to again and again and again. And after you've implemented and seen great results, you keep doing the good stuff that's working from the playbook, but then you try out another recipe and add that on. And you have this compounding effect, which is so, so powerful in business.
Wow. Could you walk us through your business growth playbook? What are the core pillars behind it?
Yeah, so there's really these 3 core variables, F, A, and Q, which conveniently, we lovingly call Jeremy as FAQs to profit, right?
Yeah.
So if we adjust any one of these, we're going to improve not just the gross revenue in our business, but also the profitability. See, a lot of business owners like mix those 2 up or don't think about profitability, right? I'm sure you've seen businesses where, they discount things and discount things and discount it some more, and they move volume, but they're often losing money with that volume, right? And so you can't make up for a lack of profit by just selling more of something, right? And unfortunately, that's what a lot of business owners do. And so they end up with volume of sales, maybe higher gross revenues, but the profitability simply isn't there, right? And so we dive into a lot of those concepts in the book. But if we look at how we increase not just your revenues, but also your profit, there's generally 3 categories and ways we can do that. And then within that, there's dozens and dozens of ways to adjust each of those levers. And so one of them, for example, is how do we improve the amount of money that a customer spends when they do business with you, right? There are many ways we can do this, but one simple one we were touching on earlier comes down to looking at your pricing model. Sometimes we set the pricing in our business years ago, and we don't think to go back and update that from time to time, even though we as consumers are so used to companies increasing their pricing to us, whether it be our cell phone providers or your internet provider, right? Or your grocery bills or any of these things that keep getting higher. Oftentimes we think about our businesses having a fixed price and don't revisit raising those prices. Sometimes we're scared to, or we don't think we can, or this is the one I see the most, we're worried we'll lose customers by raising our pricing. And if we just play with some real simple math for a moment, imagine you have a subscription business, right?
Okay.
You have a subscription where your customers pay you $40 a month, right?
Okay.
Let's say your cost of goods to service them all in is $30 a month, right? So our 40 minus our 30
Net,
gives us $10 in profit.
Yeah.
$40 in income, $30 of expenses, $10 of profit. If we were to raise our price from 40 to 50, a 25% increase, we actually improve the profitability from $10 to 20. So we double the profitability simply by a nominal increase in the pricing. Now, you don't have to go update the pricing for all your existing customers. You can, and there are good ways to do that. But if you simply try updating your sales page to a higher price, you could even convert fewer customers. You could lose half of your inflow of new customers and still make just as much money, right? And the reality is, it's rare that a little increase in price costs you half of your new customers. Often it doesn't impact the conversion rate at all. Sometimes it even improves your conversion rate. But either way, the profitability improves dramatically. And yet that's one area business owners so rarely look at in their own business.
Wow. How do we improve profitability? I think this is a very, what's the word, an actionable step. It's like increase prices and see what
And it
happens.
doesn't need to be scary. It's something you can test. You try it out on one sales page. For our tech savvy listeners who are familiar with split testing, you can split your traffic half to your existing sales page and half to your new and see how they convert, right? And if it fails as a problem, well, you haven't changed the world. You've tried out and tested one sales page.
Yeah. Before we go deeper into more of the business growth playbook, the subtitle of your book is Scaling for Business Owners Who Have Outgrown Also. What does outgrowing also mean to you?
You know, we hear so much online and out there in the world about hustling harder, right? There's this toxic hustle mentality where it's fear-based, right? And you hear these things like, while you're sleeping, your competitor is out there stealing your customers. And, while you're doing whatever else it is besides getting new business, someone else is eating your lunch. And you're going out of business because your competitor is going to outwork you, right? And that is like such a toxic fear-based mentality for business, where when we position our business uniquely, so there is no competition in the marketplace, right? Now we're building a good product that customers value and don't see other options in the marketplace. You are now allowed to have a business that generates profitability, right? While you do things like go to sleep and travel and work on other businesses and expand the business, as opposed to being in this fear-based mentality of having to close new business every second of your day. So for many business owners, they've hustled to get off the ground and worked, those 90-hour weeks. But we all know that's not sustainable, right?
Yeah, how far
Nor
can
is
you
that
go?
what we want to be doing until our last breath. So if we know that's not the long-term plan, hustle can get us so far. But at a certain point, as a business owner, as an individual, it's important to be able to step off the gas and still have the business go and grow without you being, driving behind that endless hours a week.
Yeah, a different way to ask this question would be, why do so many entrepreneurs get stuck working in their business instead of on it?
Oftentimes for business owners, it comes down to a few things. And all of these, thankfully, or maybe not thankfully, are simple mental shifts, right? If we can adjust a few small thought patterns, then we can change being a solopreneur and really start to scale, right? One of these that I see so often in solopreneurs is this perfectionist mentality, this idea that no one can do something as well as you can. And so long as you believe that you are the special snowflake and no one else can do things like you can, you'll never be able to get out of your own way and remove yourself as a bottleneck in the business.
Oh.
The moment we start to actually document and systematize what it is we do, how we do it, why we do it, and what success looks like, right? Once we've done that, now we can start to onboard someone to do the work in our business that we've been doing to date. Right? Now, some of these things are easy to bring someone else in to do because these aren't the core parts of your business, right? Maybe that's like your bookkeeping and your accounting.
Managing your email, yeah.
Right? Like managing your email, handling your frontline customer service, these different things that are distractions to you that are keeping you from doing the real work on the business. So when you bring people in, ideally better than you in certain areas of the business, that frees you up. But that's only the first part of the equation, right? The second, it's not about just giving you all of your time back to do the work of the business, right? We really want to be able to scale beyond just your time and beyond being dependent upon you, right? So when you document and train up others on how to do the core work in the business that you've been doing to date, that's when you can start to let go of some of the reins and see your business really grow. Now, even if someone is only 80% as effective as you are,
wow,
you can
80%
people at 80%, right? And now it's doing better than you. And either way, it's freed you up time-wise to do anything else in the business while that's happening.
Yeah. I'm curious, for most of my audience are solopreneurs, online businesses, online creators. For someone who's, has a creator business, right? Most of the time you're the face, right? People cannot just go out of, does that make sense? Like I have to be on camera, like I have to, like I am. Does that make sense? So it's not like, massive business where you can just employ anybody to start creating content and filming that. Of course, that could be a part. But for most people, the reason why people follow you, people like you and trust you is because of you. And so you are something that you cannot replace. Does that make sense? So what do we do in such scenario?
Yeah. So when you're scaling up your business from a branding standpoint, you can make it all about you. And that is a choice that's fine, that's limiting in certain ways, right? Because now when we look longer term, how do you sell that business, right? Any of our businesses, all businesses can only go three directions, right? When we look long term. One is you pass your business on to your kids, which like used to happen more. It doesn't really happen these days as much. It does, but it's rare. Like even if you think that's the plan, like do your kids want the business? Probably not, right? So that's unusual. It happens, but it's rare. The other, and this is unfortunately, almost all businesses go this direction, is at some point you just shut the business down and you close it. That's the reality, right? Think of how many shops and stores you've known that over time at some point, just the close sign goes up and they're out of business, right? They didn't sell, it's closed. That's where most businesses end up, and that's pretty sad. Ideally, where you go is you sell the business. You build it, you operate it, it has a value on its own, and then you sell the business. So if that's the direction you're going to go, what do you do today to improve the value of your business and make it attractive to buyers, right? And if you lean all in on your own personal brand, that's great. And I think there's a lot of good value in that. That just makes it much more difficult for you to scale and then at some point sell that. So bear that in mind for content creators, branding behind a face. The question that though I'd ask is for our listeners who are building a business based around their brand, their name, their face. What is the real back end of the business? Like, what are you doing after someone consumes your content?
Yeah.
Are you moving them to a product, to a course, to a brand? Like, what is it you're doing? Is that business valuable and saleable without your face on it? And maybe it is.
Yeah. Wow, I need to start thinking of that. What happens if I stop making podcast episodes where I get someone, to start recording the episode? Like, how do I make it? Because people are like, yeah, what's Wisdom? What happened to him? What did you do to Wisdom?
Well, you think about look at podcast networks, right? Where you have not just one podcast, but a few different personalities underneath a brand. And there's a lot of roll-ups in the industry, right? So yes, everyone knowing who Wisdom is great, right? But if we look at monetization options beyond, marketing dollars on the podcast, for example, beyond that, what is it that listeners end up doing to transact and buy? Are they buying more of you, or are they buying a branded product or, something that you've packaged up beyond the podcast? That business itself could probably have a lot of value.
Hey, quick break. Before we continue, I'd love for you to join the Wisdom Journey newsletter. Every week, I share exclusive insights, tools, and behind-the-scenes updates to help you stay ahead in your own journey of building an online business. It's simple, practical, and built to help you grow. Sign up today for free at the link in the description. Now let's get back to the episode. Yeah, this brings me. I don't know if you've heard of the concept faceless channel. And now, of course, when I say faceless YouTube channel, I'm not talking about those spammy YouTube channels. I'm talking about actual faceless channels where they're making documentaries.
Yeah.
High quality content, not those spammy stuff they put because they
Right.
don't want to show their face on camera. Documentaries, animations, all those things with voiceover. And it just goes on to show you that even though we talk about personal brand, which is great and very important, that valuable content is valuable content, period. And I see it on platforms like Vox, Vox, right? You see, these are big brands, and sometimes these are podcast network. You did mention the example. They create their own independent shows. They partner with creators. That was one part where the creators still own the content, but then they create their own independent shows. They find someone, they film it, to produce, they do everything, and they create top podcasts. But they own the content, and they pay the creator depending on the agreement, and that does make sense.
Yeah. If you think about, like, if we zoom out from podcasts to earlier when we had, like, evening news or news programming, right? Um, there was a brand for the channel, the network, the show. And yes, there are hosts for that show that everyone
Yeah,
knows and loves and grows up with. And maybe they're a newscaster for 20 years, right? That's fine. But when that person leaves, they've not taken just the brand of their show with them, right? The brand, the show still goes on, but now there's a different host or someone else running it. And we've seen this on, game shows, news, all sorts of different programs over the decades, right? The brand, the essence of that lives on multi-generationally, even
yeah,
though it's a different face at the helm of it.
yeah. So it just from what you've said so far, we're building a media business, and examples like the New York Times. It's a respectable, magazine. Even though most of the writers, there's some really great writers on New York Times, they move on to do other things. But New York Times itself is respectable, and probably because they have a system for finding the best of writers and
Yeah.
having them be on the platform, such that even beyond those writers living years, maybe 50 years after, it's like, the New York Times. And there's one other example I was about to mention. I can't exactly remember. Yeah, radio stations, TV networks, and podcast networks. And
Mhm.
yeah. Now that you just mentioned it, ideas are just coming up in my head. Like I could have, of course, doing my own independent podcast. I love interviewing guests. That's great. But if I wanted to turn this into an actual media business that could be sellable, I could have the newsletter segments, all those parts. But then I could partner with different creators and say, okay, you own your content. You're going to be under my podcast network. Share it maybe 60-40%. We handle the production, the growth, the monetization, everything. You as a creator, you just show up and you do the magic that you're good at. And we do have a system for finding the best of the best creators that actually have, they have this magnet stuff. We sign the contract and such that, we'll have 10, 20 podcasts under our networks and we'll make them big. Wow.
Yeah. It's
Wow.
like the Wisdom Media Network, right? You can have
Yeah.
a lot of things under that brand.
Yeah.
So what's nice about that, I've seen this and helped clients do this in their business before, is this idea of, like, working up your supply chain. So in any business, if you look at, like, what are your biggest expenses, and then you start to ask, like, is this an important part of our supply chain? And if it is, like, is this a business that we can also do? One of my favorite stories of this comes from a business out of Ann Arbor, Zingerman's. Zingerman started as a delicatessen near the college campus in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Okay.
Right? Everyone loved going in there. They had great sandwiches. And when they looked at their expenses, they realized one of their biggest expense categories was dairy, right? They put cheese on most of their sandwiches. They put, milk in the coffees and everything else. So they bought a lot of dairy. So the question then became, well, what can we do with that expense category? So they ended up starting a second company that was a dairy and provided the milk, the cheese, and all the products to the deli,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
also to other restaurants and grocery stores and direct to consumers and all that. And so then they looked at their expenses and said, well, what else do we spend money on? And well, every sandwich has bread, right? So next thing you know, there's a bakery. And then next thing you know, they look at, coffee. So they end up becoming, for serious, a coffee importer, right? A
Yeah.
coffee roaster and a cafe, which 3 businesses, by the way, right? So they end up with this whole network of businesses,
Yeah.
each of them selling to all the other businesses, but also selling to wholesalers, selling to restaurants, selling direct to consumer, and so on. So every one of these operated as their own independent business, but also was part of the supply chain for each other. And they had a shared central office because there's things all the businesses need. They all need accounting, they all need marketing, they all need admin. So they had, like, a shared, services for all these businesses. But in the end, if you look at all the expenses in the companies, a lot of the biggest expense categories in the supply chain ended up actually being revenue going back to, a sister company that was directly affiliated with that company. And so businesses can do the same thing. If you look at what are my biggest expenses in running a podcast, and that's podcast production.
Yeah.
Well, next thing you know, and many podcasters do this,
Production
they have
company.
a podcast production company.
Wow.
So now they sell the ability to, like you said, show up and record an episode. We'll take care of the marketing. We'll take care of the editing. We'll take care of the production, the scheduling, the admin, the everything. You do the thing that you're great at, and we'll handle the rest for a fee. And so that's a very successful model working your way up the supply chain.
So many ideas. Wow. Earlier on I asked you how why people work in the business instead of on the business. And I think just listening to you respond to that question, it becomes clear that working in the business is being an operator. I could be wrong, but let me know if I'm wrong. And then working on the business is being an owner. Is that true?
Yeah. The work in the business is, like you said, being an operator, it's doing the work of the business. So if
Yeah.
you have a plumbing company, right, working in the business is doing plumbing work, right? Or the other roles in the company. Working on the business is figuring out pricing and working on strategy and figuring out branding and launching new products and the hiring and the systems and all the things that help you to truly grow a business. From a financial standpoint, it's funny. This goes back to a question you had earlier about, being self-employed versus a business owner. A lot of people who get into business, right, take some money out of the company, right? And it's oftentimes in the earlier days sporadic, right? And they sort of just withdraw some money as they need it. But they don't pay themselves like an employee of the company. They take sporadic distributions. And then at some point you grow, right? And revenues, steady out and you are seeing increasing revenues and all. And yet still business owners don't pay themselves like an employee and a business owner. And you see those two things are actually very different expense categories, right? If you were to do a time diary and look at all the things that you spend your time doing all week long in your company, and then you ask, what would it cost me to hire somebody else to do all these things? Now you put that in your budget and you look at two things. One, are you getting paid enough for all the work you're doing in the business?
Yeah.
For many smaller business owners, they are not, right?
Yeah.
You'd be lucky if you're making below minimum wage, right? But let's assume you're now making good money for what it would cost for someone else to do all of it. Now we can look at what is the real profitability in the company if you as the business owner did zero, if you did nothing in the company and other people did all the work in the company. Right? Now, what is the profitability? Because there's two things that come from that. One is the distributions that you as the owner can take for having this income producing asset, right? And two, when we look at that idea of selling our business, our valuation is often based on the profitability in the company. Because if the business relies on you operating it, now you're an owner operator. And that's okay. But that means the only person who can buy your company will be a future owner operator.
Yeah.
Right. When we look at, we have it's an international restaurant, Subway, the sandwich franchise, they grow on a franchise model. So people buy into, license the Subway store and then they operate it. This number's a little dated at this point, but the stat for a while was that most franchise owners make something like only $60,000 a year and they work like 80 hours a week. And that's a company, by the way, that they paid money to get into. They've invested money to buy themselves an 80-hour-a-week job to make not that great money as an owner, right? Now, that's not all of them. Some people know how to run the franchise model very successfully and very profitably and so on. But my point in that is, if you're looking at an owner-operator model, well, that's only so scalable. If you find the right levers to pull so that you can step back from the business and have others doing all the work in the business so it doesn't need any of your time, you still can work, but it shouldn't require that. Now, that profitability comes out to you as the owner, and you have a true income-producing asset and a saleable, valuable asset.
Yeah. Just listening to the owner-operator analysis you did, I just realized that for most, now I don't have any stats on the number, but I'm just like, basic observation. For most business owners, for those that are not, I'm not talking about solopreneurs, I'm talking about those that have maybe 3, 4, 5 persons working on them. They spend most of their time managing the people working.
Yeah. Oftentimes, like as you start to build out a team, you move from the operator to, at least in the beginning, the manager, right? And that's okay, but that still requires you being present and a part of it. So one of my favorite hires in any one of my businesses is like my number 2, right? Like the general manager, the one who can run things when you're not there. Like that is a really valuable role. Someone who has the ability to hire, manage, fire, train, document, do all the things in the business when you're not there. And that's really valuable. If you look at like a retail or a physical business, right? Scalability is something you can test with your number of locations. When you have one location, whether it's a restaurant or a studio or, whatever you've got, you can be there and watch everything going on and step in and correct and help out and do the work of the business if you need to. When you go to two locations, well, maybe you bounce back between them and you spend half of your day at each one, right? And you're kind of hoping that the other one does okay while you're not there for half the day. As soon as you get to like 3 locations or more, now your systems have to run without you being there because it starts to become less and less possible for you to be physically at the business. Now
Yeah.
you're truly starting to rely on your systems and your people. So it's a really good way to stress test that you've got a true business versus, an owner operator, model that simply can't scale beyond you.
Oh, phew. This is so valuable. We've cleared out the parts, what it means to be an operator, what it means to be an owner, what it means to work in the business versus what it means to work on the business. And this has been some of the, as a solopreneur, this has been some of the concepts that I've adopted, right? I noticed that I love to record interviews, right? Great. But then I spend most of my time reaching out to guests, you know, and I'm like, okay, so when do I actually do the podcast episode? When do I, do the thing that I love to do? And I'm like, okay, what if I got someone to be the guest manager? And it took a couple of months to train. But I was just like, that was my first attempt at it. I was like, okay, let me put all the SOPs, supervise them, see them working, and now I can sleep in peace. I sleep like a baby.
Yeah.
After this podcast interview, I will stop it, and voila, I'm relaxed. I don't
Yep.
think about like I think I've done a great job to the essence where she does a fantastic job at managing the guests, responding to them, even when the episode goes live, sending them oh yeah, here's the link to the episode. These are things that I could probably be doing, but it will take away from the podcast. So now I spend time saying, okay, what kind of guests do I want to interview? How do I grow the podcast? How do I monetize it? And I'm thinking, the strategy for the business rather than, okay, that's true. Jeremy asked me this question. I've not responded to him. What do I tell him? Yeah,
Yeah.
which that's of course that's important, which is why I got someone and trainer to do that. And now you're saying all this, I'm like, wow,
It's
it makes
great.
sense.
It's really well done. And I love that you mentioned SOPs. So many business owners don't have standard operating procedures documented down. And so when we document what we do, right, it does a few important things, right? One is when you're hiring or interviewing someone, you can now share with them exactly what it is they'll be doing.
Yeah, the rule.
Right? You set them up for success right from the get-go. They'll now know if they're hired, if they're doing a good job, if they're on track, if something is missing. They'll know, and they'll know that you'll know. And so things become less subjective, right? When everyone knows the clear definition of success. But here's the other interesting thing with your SOPs. When you create one of 3 things is going to happen, right? It starts
Okay.
getting used, and ideally, someone follows your system and they get an output that you're happy with. That's a win. That's our happy. Ideally, that's what happens. In the beginning, what usually happens is you document it, someone runs the system, and they don't get the result that you want. And you go back and you look and you realize that there was something you thought was obvious or you thought would have been clear, but that person didn't know because you didn't put it in the system. So you update the system. So the system gets revised and edited to clear up all those knowledge gaps. And then you get back to that happy path if someone runs the system and gets the result you want. The third outcome, and this sometimes happens over time as folks, become a little complacent, right?
Yeah.
Is you'll have a system that is tried and true and someone doesn't get the result. And when you look at why they didn't get the result you wanted, it's because they didn't follow the system, right? And now, again, it's not subjective. Now it's a coachable teaching moment of going back to the system and trying to figure out why they didn't follow the system or what went wrong. And either they get retrained back up on that, right? Or maybe they're just not the right person for that role. But at least the system was good and other people can use it successfully. And if only someone would follow it, they would get that same result as well.
I feel that every business owner should at least try to make an SOP, because while I was making the SOPs, I just realized that so many things I was doing, they just didn't move the needle for the business. I was like, oh, so I do this. How does this tie to the output? Nothing really. And I had to like cut those parts and then refocus it and say, okay, this is what you do, this is what you do, this is what you do. And one of the things I would ask them was, how do you know you're doing a great job? And they will tell me, because I want to really know if they understand the road. I go, oh, this is. I'm like, no, that's not it. If you do this, you do this, you do this. At any point in time, you're crushing it, and I don't have to necessarily tell you that you're doing well, so that they know that, okay, I'm doing well. Oh, and if the number goes down, like, oh, that's true, I need to catch up, and stuff like that.
Yeah. When you, outside of business, just in life in general, when you have a clear definition of success, everyone can know if they're hitting it or not. We picked this up from a friend of ours years ago. We were heading out to her lake house for the weekend. And before everyone came out there for the weekend, she asked us, this is again, a social group of friends, like, hey, what is your definition of success for the weekend? What would make it a wonderful trip? And here I was thinking like we were going for a relaxing, vacation weekend. I wasn't thinking about how to define success, but then we saw the list that came together and people are sharing like, oh, I'm looking forward to, good meals with friends. Other folks were looking forward to, board game night. And other folks were looking forward to, getting out to the beach and going in the water. And like everyone had different things that were important to them. And wouldn't you know, when you put it all down on paper, you can make sure everyone's boxes get checked. And at the end of the weekend, it's been successful.
Yeah.
If you don't define what success looks like, then when it's all said and done, it's pretty easy to say, oh, gee, I wish I had done this, or, oh, we didn't do this thing and that's disappointing, because now you're defining it after the fact. And this applies in business as well. If you don't figure out, for example, with a marketing campaign, how to know if it's successful or not, you might run a product launch and at the end of it, be disappointed with the result because you never set a goal for what you wanted to accomplish. Right? If you do set that goal, you can exceed that and know you did really well. You can fall short of it and then look at what you can do to get better. But at least you've defined it and you don't move that goalpost until after that defined time window. When you hire someone, you have an SOP, you define in that SOP what success is. That way you know it and they know it. And you can determine, did they get the output you wanted? And if it isn't, well, then maybe you need to revise what that definition is because there's something you didn't, quite have in. And that's really valuable for people to know where they stand. So just like you said, they can know, are they hitting the mark or not? And what can they do to get back on track?
Yeah, doing this SOP, one of the things I noticed that it helped me do is give valuable feedback. Most business owners don't know how to give feedback. They tell you, Jeremy, you need to communicate better, and Jeremy's like, what do I do? I don't know what that means. But then you're like, okay, Jeremy, when we send you a message, the moment you see the message, even though you've not worked on it, we want you to acknowledge that you've seen the message, that you're working on it. That way, we don't need to wonder if we need to reach out or call you again or disturb you, just so you make sure you get the message. And then, a couple of things that, okay, when we send you a message, we need you to respond within so number of time. And that way, it's easy. Okay, I need to respond on time. I need to do this. I need to do this. Okay, this is what it means to be a better communicator. When we're doing a meeting, we need to prepare a write-up based on the thing that we're doing in the meeting so that we have ideas to share. It becomes like specific rather than, okay, you're not a good communicator and they're like, oh, I feel terrible. How do I improve? And they're trying what they think is the thing they need to do. And they're like, oh, I have told you before. How many times would I tell you? Like, you don't communicate. And they're like, and they feel terrible.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, the parallels between, parenting and running a business, right? How often as parents do we not define success to our kids, right?
Yeah.
And so it's very similar in business. So when, like, for your example there with communication, you define up front, like, hey, our culture of communication is you acknowledge a message as soon as it comes in. If it's during business hours, we expect to hear back within this amount of time and so on. Then someone knows if they're hitting the mark or not. And if they're not, here's what's nice is it becomes not interpersonal. It's not about you and them.
Yeah.
There's this system that we all agreed is important. And so according to the system, we're not adhering to the system. How do we get you back to working within the system?
The system.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like over the course of this conversation, we've talked about setting big levers, but I'd love for you to dig into some of the big levers that high impact actions that entrepreneurs can take right now to grow revenue without burning out. I mean, at the beginning you mentioned increasing prices, right? And we've also talked about SOPs, and so what to call it now, getting an operator for the business, breaking those things down. What other things could we do to just increase revenue?
Yeah, one of my, we talked earlier when you were asking about, things I look for in a business and, what I like and, what are unacceptable things not to have and so on. One of those items I learned over the years that I love helping businesses put in place is a recurring revenue component, right? So many businesses go out there and hunt for sales and get individual transactions with new customers.
Yeah.
And then they move on to the next one. And you're in this constant mode of, looking for, individual transactions.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is the subscription model, right?
Yeah. So subscriptions are a form of recurring revenue, but we want to have continuity in some form, right?
Oh,
So this can be paid membership. This can be a subscription. This can be paid newsletter, right? There's all kinds of different models. It can be software as a service, right? Many business models use this, but what I love are helping business models to implement recurring revenue components in businesses that don't typically have that. So one of my favorite examples is there's a client I was working with who had a legal practice, right? This is an attorney,
Okay.
a solicitor, right? So
Yeah.
normally in that kind of work, you do, in this case, it was estate planning. You help out a client one time. You do
Yeah.
work, fee for service, and then that's it. You never talk to them or work with them again, right? Your work is done. Well, we're able to put a continuity program in place so that those clients didn't just have a once and done. They had annual meetings to go over and keep those documents up to date, because oftentimes these documents are created once,
Yeah.
put it on a shelf, and never looked at again. And
Well,
so now not only were there one-time transactions from new clients, there was recurring revenue from every single client in the practice. When you have recurring revenue in place, if you don't go out and get a single new sale in a given week or a month, whatever,
yeah.
there's at least still a baseline amount of revenue that's coming in. Of course, you can go get new customers, right, and increase that number, but you always have this money that comes in while you sleep. And that's the beautiful part of continuity businesses is every day, no matter what you do, there's revenue coming in. And so sometimes we find ways to generate revenue that directly depends on us when we start out. And sometimes we find the strategies and ways to create a business that generates revenue that doesn't depend on us. Ideally, we do that by choice. But I had a client that I was working with who had a demolition company,
Yeah.
right? So they would go out and do construction. They write up estimates on the job site and then bring out the trucks and the bobcat and the backhoe and, do work on site with clients. And he'd be there to make sure the crew showed up and got the work done and all that, right? Well, that was all good and great until one day he's out there talking to a client when the truck and a trailer separated. So the trailer started to
Mm.
roll away from the truck down the street directly towards him. And he looked up in time to see the truck run him over and drag him down the street, breaking his leg, blood everywhere, crushing organs. Like, it was awful. And so he comes to in the emergency room and eventually is over to the intensive care unit and all, and is looking down at his broken body. And he has a business that was so dependent on the physicality of him being involved. And so his choice was close up shop or find a way for the business to continue running without him being in it physically every single day.
Yeah.
And so we ended up hiring a sales rep and created the system so the sales rep could go out there and write estimates for customers and close new business. And wouldn't you know, the guy was pretty good and was bringing in new business while he's laid up in the hospital, right? And then he needed to make sure his guys got sent into the job site every day. And so all these different things had to fall into place, not because he thought, wouldn't it be nice if I worked less, right? This was a workaholic. It happened because he physically couldn't do it, right? And so for many business owners, when you have recurring revenue in your business, that's something that allows you to continue generating revenue even when you're not there, whether it's by choice, right? Or by circumstance.
I'm glad I survived it. I'm super glad because usually that's what happens. It then leads to the other part of what the business ends up being. It shuts down. Nobody can handle it. Nobody really knows, and everybody goes their way. And voila, that's it. And
This is
wow,
like if you've ever seen like a restaurant or a dry cleaner or like a typical small family-owned business. It always blows my mind when you see a sign on the door saying, we're closed for a week, we're on vacation. I'm looking at that, I'm like, wow, like their business is so dependent on the owners being there that they can't run the business to generate revenue while they're not there. What a difference it would be if they could step away from their business for a week or two and be on vacation, not just because they have the financial freedom to do so, but because they have the people and systems in place in a business that doesn't depend on them. And now
yeah,
you're effectively getting paid to go on vacation. And what a different headspace that puts you in than
yeah,
feeling
it's
like
a
you've got to
different
work
thing.
your 90 hours a week in the business or you can't pay your bills.
Yeah, and then you have a higher leverage tax you're working on, such that when you work 4, 5, 10 hours, you're crushing things, and things are moving, and like, wow, he's a genius.
Yeah.
Not
It
really.
feels good to work on the big stuff in your business too. When you're stuck on the front lines all day, that can also feel good, but you don't move the needle forward in the business. You're just doing that day-to-day work of the business. When you get that freedom to step back and do the big work on the business, that lets you grow, that lets you start to implement some of the different things we're talking about, from increasing your pricing or putting continuity programs in place to, all the other strategies I cover in the book. It gives you the space to implement. And that really is what makes the difference. Not the ideas, not the
Yeah.
plan, but the actual execution of those ideas.
Since you're talking about implementation and execution, a lot of entrepreneurs, they have this fantastic idea. I'm hoping I I don't put myself on the spot, but I've had so many fantastic ideas from this talk, and I'm like, I really want to implement, but for some reason, it's 2 months after, 3 months after you see them, probably me, and they're like, oh yeah, wisdom, how far? You talked about some fantastic ideas for the podcast, and how's it going? And I'm like, "Ah, Jeremy, actually a lot of stuff, and like, and you're like, blah 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 blah. Excuse.
right?
How do we actual? How do I explain this? How do we build a culture or habit of implementation?
Yeah, so there's a few thoughts around this, and this is something that I love talking about and helping people out with, and it's sort of a superpower of mine, the execution side of things. And there's a story that I open with in the book that I love, which talks about it's one of Aesop's fables, I think, about the wagoner and Hercules. And a wagoner is a super old fashioned term we don't use anymore, but it's if you imagine like a wooden cart, with the 4 wooden wheels and the 2 oxen who are pulling it, right? The wagoner is the guy who drives the wagon forward down the road, right? So the wagoner is out on the road, and there's a rut on the side of the road, and the wagon literally gets stuck in a rut. Like we talk about getting stuck in a rut as a turn of phrase, but this wagoner literally gets stuck in a rut. And the first thing he does is he stops and sort of shakes his fist to the sky, and he yells up to Hercules, the god Hercules, like, Hercules, like, help me, save me, like, fix this. And so Hercules, comes down, I imagine from like Mount Olympus, and looks at the sky and says, like, man, have you even tried like leaning into the wagon and giving it a push to get out of the rut? Have you urged your oxen and like, urge them to move forward and pull the cart? Like, did you do anything to make any change, or are you just throwing your hands up to the gods hoping someone will just help you out and get it done for you, right? And so the wagoner follows this advice of Hercules and leans into the cart and pushes and calls out to the oxen and urges them forward, and between the oxen pulling and this guy pushing, they get the wagon out of the rut. Not because the gods with some divine force move this wagon back on. No, the wagoner did something. He took action, and that's really the difference. A lot of us wish and want for change in our life or in our business or in the world, but then don't do anything about it. So how can we be more like the wagoner after he talked to Hercules and take action and do something? So that's really what it comes down to, is when you get these ideas like we're talking about, like first step is good, like write them down, right? Get them out of the swirl of our mind where we'll often forget them, and write it down, right? That's a good place. Find a parking lot. But then create the time in your calendar to go through those ideas, because sometimes what we think is the most brilliant, game-changing, life-altering idea, when we give it a few hours or a few days and we look back on it, we realize maybe that's not where we should spend our time. And it's good to have the perspective. Otherwise, we end up firefighting, jumping from one thing to the next, and never really making any difference in our business or our lives, right? Whereas if you give it the space, you can flesh an idea out and then determine, should I pursue this? Does it check the boxes that are important for me, right? And then what resources does this need from me? And what will I be saying no to when I say yes to this idea? And one of my favorite examples of this, I was in a mastermind group. This was a really high-end group of great business owners running very successful businesses. And, one of the guys, sitting around the small table with me there, was one of these entrepreneurs who has like, a few private jets and a whole staff, taking care of all the needs in the business and companies that run themselves, and like had a really great suite of companies. And he's in the room just like I am, taking notes with ideas, and sharing openly and willingly and expertly with the group as well. But one thing he did that I learned and loved was each time we take a break between speakers and presentations, he would get up and take the pages of his notebook where he'd taken notes, tear those out, and hand those off to one of his aides that was there. And his team member would then take those and document that and communicate those back to the office. And he'd come back into the boardroom with a clear slate and a clear mind, ready for new ideas, knowing that he'd captured the ideas and things he wanted to research or look into or try out. And the team was now able to take the ball and run with it. So when the meeting was all over after a few days, he could sit down with his team and things would either already be done and shipped and finished, or they'd be ready to have a discussion with him, or a plan would be presented. And a lot of that prep and execution work was already underway or done. And he could stay at that high level like the rest of us and be the visionary for the business as the entrepreneur.
Oh, I love that example, because so many times we store ideas in our head where ideas are not meant to like be there, like they're meant to like they're made in the head, but they're not meant to be stored there. And I really love the example of what he did. He has a system, an idea comes, this is what happens next. Because a lot of persons they have an idea, but there's this gulf of waiting to decide, right? Something you probably should have applied this week. You wait 6 months in order to take the step, probably because you're afraid. It's new territory. It's something you've never done before. And so it's painful and all that.
I look at all the, biggest growth moments in any of my businesses over the years. So often they came down to executing on an idea, getting something done and shipping it. Because until you ship your idea and get it out there, it's a sunk cost. You've invested time, resource, energy into an idea, but until it's out there generating revenue, it's just an idea. There was a mastermind group that I was running, and we had two business owners, there in particular for this story, who had very different businesses. But what's really important to me in the groups that I run is accountability and making sure people share what they want to get done over the next month, and then that they're held accountable to it and they can come back and report on the results. And in this case, these two different business owners were each growing their business in two different ways. And we facilitated this great conversation where each of those business owners was able to implement the other's idea in their business over the course of the month. And so the retail store operator, for example, wasn't doing any email marketing. The e-commerce store owner was growing his business so much with email marketing. He knew when he sent an email out to his list, money came in.
Yeah.
So what do you think he did every single day? He made sure that emails went out, and he'd measure things like the open rate and the click-through rates and the sales and the earnings per click and all these different metrics. The retail store owner had never heard of half of those terms, let alone done this at all in the business. So over the course of the month, that retail store owner, we got in place multiple ways to capture new customers' email information, the right systems to send out email communications, the right ways to track those metrics. And so over the month, that business owner implemented the best practices and the ideas to add email marketing to a very physical business. And suddenly that business owner was sharing the stats from their business about the open rates and click-throughs and earnings per click. And now they too could click send on an email and watch money come back in. But that never would have happened had they not implemented and executed on the idea. So it's not just the idea, it's not just hearing about it, it's not wishing about it, it's not making a plan for it, it's actually getting it done. That's what gets you results that really grow the business.
Wow. I love that example, cross-pollinating ideas. I so much love that. There's so many ideas from this book that before I ask how we can get a copy of the book, because just we've chatted for about 50 minutes, and that's not even enough time to cover what's in the book. I know there will be some more specific strategies. Take one step, step two, stories and everything. One piece of wisdom you'll leave with every entrepreneur listening right now.
Yeah, so a lot of folks have ideas or want to do things, but for whatever reason, they're afraid to take action to get something done, right? This would be like waiting to leave the house in your car until all the traffic lights were green between here and where you're going.
Yeah.
Obstacles are going to come up, and that's okay. You may not have all the answers to everything before you set out, but that shouldn't stop you from starting on whatever the journey is that you'd like. And if we look at what is like the smallest incremental thing we can do that we can ship, so we can start getting some value from that, then we can take action on that small bite-sized piece. It doesn't need to be an entire new business, a new product line, a new everything. What is a piece of incremental value you can ship? If you have an idea for a business, what is the minimum viable product you can demo with a few prospective customers so that you can launch and then have paying customers really early on using the smallest, simplest, easiest version of that product? Then you have revenue, and then you can grow from there. Every one of my businesses has launched with positive cash flow. None of them have launched from taking on debt or investors or anything else like that. They've all launched starting early with revenue coming in the door before expenses are due, right? And that's all because of shipping a minimum viable product that people are willing to pay for early on. So for our listeners, whatever the idea is that you have, whatever the fears are around taking action, figure out what is that little piece of action you could take right now to ship a piece of incremental value and generate some revenue today, and start that flywheel going. Because the sooner you find out that something doesn't work, the sooner you can find a way for it to work and for it to become your next business, your next product, your next idea.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that wisdom. Where can listeners get a copy of your book and actually dive deeper, break down and actually from step A to step B?
Yeah, you can find out more about Your Business Growth Playbook, at yourbusinessgrowthplaybook.com. You can find out the information on the book. You can buy the book online from, all your favorite places where you buy books, right from there. I've also got a number of great tools and resources, my social media, all those things. Simply go there. You can sign up on my site, and that'll get you access to everything you need to get back to the growth that you as a business owner truly deserve. And that's at yourbusinessgrowthplaybook.com.
Yeah, yourbusinessgrowthplaybook.com. I'll add the link in the description so listeners can click and go directly to the site. Jeremy, thank you so much for sharing your business wisdom on Wisdom Journey. This conversation is exactly what so many entrepreneurs need right now, including me. And I'm really glad you accepted my invitation to be a podcast. I feel privileged. You give me so much value. Really. Wow.
Thank you for inviting me on. This was a ton of fun. Love the show and all the great questions.
Thanks for tuning into Wisdom Journey. I hope today's episode gave you practical steps and fresh ideas to keep moving forward. If you found value, be sure to subscribe and share this podcast with a fellow creator or entrepreneur who'd love to learn too. And don't forget to sign up for the newsletter and the link in the description for more resources, experiments, and lessons straight to your inbox. Until next time, keep building, keep learning, and keep walking your own wisdom journey. Yeah.